This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
South African Government Minister Jackson Mthembu dies of COVID-19 as the Africa CDC warns of rising deaths. As Washington resets its foreign relations under Joe Biden, what are Africa's prospects and priorities? And the United Nations voices deep concern over the worsening humanitarian crisis in Mozambique. Live from Nairobi, this is Africa Live. I'm Lindy Mtongana, and with me in studio is Penina Karibe with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Business tonight, the African Development Bank to provide debt relief of more than $400 million to Sudan. And inflation in Zimbabwe drops to 349%, a lot better than over 700% some months earlier. I'll have details of those stories and plenty more in just a bit tonight. Back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Penina. Well, Africa's COVID-19 fatality rate is now higher than the global average. That's according to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The death rate on the continent now stands at 2.5%. That's against the global average of 2.2%. The announcement comes as the number of nations recording higher death rates continues to grow. In what seemed to be the second wave in Africa, 21 countries have recorded a death rate of above 3%. This news comes as prominent South African politician Jackson Mthembu died from coronavirus-related complications. A few days ago, he confirmed having tested positive for the virus via a tweet. He served as a minister and parliamentarian, as well as a high-ranking member of the African National Congress. Well, let's cross now to Dr. David Monyai. He's the director of the Center for African-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. Monyai, thank you so much for your time. Now, Jackson Mthembu was one of the most recognizable South African leaders, having served in a very high-profile positions within the ANC, within Parliament, and the Office of the Presidency. Most recently, he was the public face of the country's COVID-19 response. How do you think he'll be remembered?
I think he's going to be remembered as a remarkable South African, a freedom fighter, a person that really loved his country and the African people, and really involved in global anti-apartheid on a number of other struggles, whether it's Western Sahara, Palestine, and other many areas. He will be remembered as a person who really played a critical role from Mandela presidency, President Mbeki, Zuma, and up to now to President Ramaphosa's cabinet. A central role as a minister in the presidency, coordinating the entire state, and at the forefront of the fight against COVID that unfortunately took his life.
Indeed. And of course, his passing just adds to a sadly growing list of public figures in Africa that have succumbed to the virus. We've seen a minister die in Malawi, another in Zimbabwe. Do you think we are starting to see that Africa is struggling to keep people alive? There are oxygen shortages across the continent, and of course, vaccines are still far away.
It's an unfortunate reality that as much as Africa has done extremely well in terms of delaying the process using basic methods of sanitizing, distancing, and all other protocols encouraged by World Health Organization, they've done extremely well. However, the second wave seemed to really deepening the crisis. I think compounding the situation is that most African countries do not have the capacity to handle the disease, do not have infrastructure, do not have resources to even queue for the vaccines that we see, unfortunately, developed countries hogging the space very selfishly, defending their own people at the expense of the poor, particularly on the African continent.
And of course, that is an issue that the WHO has highlighted this week, this failure of Western countries to cater for Africa. What do you think then needs to be done to ensure vaccines are made available to the continent as soon as possible, particularly as we see that death rates are indeed rising?
Africa, through the AU, I think, need to make a strong case at the level of World Health Organization, and especially with the developed countries, to really look this as a humanitarian disaster. And far beyond that, reach out to other important states in the world that are playing a critical role in this field, particularly Russia and China, and to ensure that Africa uses all vaccines without any geopolitics involved in the vaccine nationalism that is on the rise. Most of vaccines from the developed country are extremely expensive and complex to be managed on the African continent. Other than the one from Oxford in UK that is relatively cheap and easy to manage, I think the African continent could reach out to Russia and China to assist the continent before the situation gets worse.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, as always, for your insights. Dr. David Monyai joining us there from Johannesburg. Let's turn now to Zimbabwe, and a rise in the number of COVID-19 cases in that country has seen the government impose restrictions on traditional burial rites. The new rules require that trained professionals bury the dead, body viewing is not allowed, and relatives are to be kept at a distance. The government says the measures are necessary to combat the spread of the virus, but locals feel they're too drastic and unjustified.
Somehow funerals have been spreaders of the infections. We have now had a couple of cases where people have visited, have attended the funeral, and then the next thing they are sick and they are dead. And sometimes you can even have several family members. After attending a funeral, they get sick, some they don't make it.
They should allow a few relatives to conduct body viewing during the time the body is being prepared from the mortuary to coffin. That will allow closure for the bereaved family.
It's not proper to just bury our loved ones without bidding them farewell or in a place where we will have limited access to. It doesn't reflect well on our cultural norms.
We had our highest number of COVID-19 burials yesterday. We buried 14 people. This disease is real. Let's observe the regulations.
Now, scientists all over the world have relied heavily on genome sequencing to identify and track the SARS-CoV-2 virus from the start of the global pandemic back in December 2019. Now, South Africa is one of the few African countries that is able to employ this method to determine the virus's behavior and its patterns of spreading. It's also got the highest number of coronavirus cases on the continent. CGTN's Julie Shire has more.
Scientists in South Africa have been studying the coronavirus since first being detected here last March. The KwaZulu-Natal Research, Innovation and Sequencing Platform, CRISP, is at the forefront of this genetic surveillance.
We have a network of 5 big laboratories that do genomic sequencing in different parts of the country. And we're routinely sequencing some of the samples from the routine diagnostic swabs for the virus. And by doing that, we're kind of tracking how the virus spreads around the country, and also now, obviously, how it evolves with the changing nature of the epidemic.
Genome sequencing has been important in determining the country's COVID-19 response. Through this work, researchers tracked over 30 mutations and discovered the N501Y strain, driving South Africa's second wave.
It was through that kind of routine sequencing that we picked up this unusual variant and kind of flagged that the pattern of mutations in this variant was different to what we've been seeing with the other viruses circulating in the country. So when we saw that there were 7 or 8 mutations in the spike protein that were changing the protein, they were amino acid mutations, that made us concerned.
The new coronavirus strain has been relentless. Infection rates are at their highest. Deaths have accelerated and hospitals have run out of beds for the sick. Numbers are starting to drop, leading scientists to believe the second wave is subsiding. The concern now is for other African countries without similar capabilities.
There is some capacity for this genomic sequencing in some countries within Africa, but it's relatively limited. And so it really needs a collaborative effort to make sure that we can support other countries in Africa to do the genomic sequencing and track the spread of this. We know already that this variant is in Zambia, it's in Botswana, it's been reported in Ghana.
Scientists warn of further mutations if vaccines are not rolled out, heightening the importance of continuing research.
We also want to make sure that our treatments and our vaccines and our diagnostics are still going to work too. And that's why we need to actually track these viruses. If it doesn't work, the vaccines work as well, perhaps a lower efficacy rate overall compared to what has been described so far, we may have to modify the vaccines.
Africa's anxiously awaiting the arrival of the first doses. Delays could compromise not just the continent's efforts, but the global fight too. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now turning to US-Africa relations, as new US President Joe Biden gets to work, repairing alliances and boosting multilateralism seems to be on his agenda. But how will this play out on the ground in Africa? Dr. Idayat Hassan, Director of the Center for Democracy and Development, an Abuja-based think tank, gives us her perspective.
I think the biggest win for young people on the African continent, in Nigeria, and of course in Muslim countries, is the reversal of the immigration ban, which is actually discriminatory. Now, legitimately, young people, aspiring migrants, can move to the United States of America in search of better life. I think that makes us happy, and it's a welcome development. And importantly also, it might also lessen the challenges that is currently encountered as a green passport holder, as a Nigerian, for instance, at the port of entry in the United States of America. So this is very good. Importantly, when it comes to the issue of inequality, it is big, and there is no way to actually signify it. I think what Africans are patiently or impatiently waiting for is the appointment of the the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, because this will actually signify the policy direction of the United States on the continent. Having an Africanist well-versed means that there would be positive that will actually happen. It will tell us, in fact, what the policy will look like. Democracy promotion, it's one thing that is very, very important. Considering the insurrection of January 6 in the US Capitol or the US Congress, it is expected that many autocrats will be using that as a basis to climb down on the already restricting civic space in the continent. President Biden will have to make a tough choice in terms of its own appeal to understand that he has a duty to jointly promote democratic values with other leaders of the world.
Now, Donald Trump left office having completed the withdrawal of US troops from Somalia. Their departure comes at a critical time for the Horn of Africa nation as it plans to go to the polls amid increased threats from insurgent groups. Here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo with more from Mogadishu.
Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble is rallying his country's forces ahead of the withdrawal of American troops from Somalia. For years, the US government has been mentoring this elite unit of the armed force known as DANAP at this military base south of the capital, Mogadishu.
On our part as the government, we are ready to stand by your side, ready to provide our unconditional support. Both the President and the administration are ready to work with all of you. We look forward to joining you in the battlefront.
At least 700 armed personnel are stationed in the East African nation, assisting the Somali Army and African Union forces in battling militant groups Al-Shabaab and ISIL. almost all U.S. personnel stationed in Somalia are due to leave the country by 15th January. This is after the American President Donald Trump ordered their withdrawal. Abdsalam Guled is a security and counterterrorism expert. He says the departure of American troops will impact years of security cooperation between Mogadishu and Washington.
Now is the election time. It's a terrible time where all Somalis' energy and effort and mind and money focus and concentrate on elections. In 2 months' time, hopefully, we will have a new government, either this government coming back or another government installed. And I hope the Americans will do the same. Then Joe Biden will probably move into the office in January and reverse the policy towards Somalia, reverse the American withdrawal from Somalia, and probably we will see more American boots on the ground in Somalia.
The country is preparing to conduct elections for new lawmakers, senators and president. The polls will be conducted in at least 2 districts in each of the country's 5 regional states. Militant group Al-Shabaab has threatened to disrupt the electoral process. In the past, it has targeted electoral delegates, clan elders, and some of the parliamentary candidates. Meanwhile, the federal government has deployed paramilitary troops to some of the hotspot areas, including Hiran and the Gedo region.
The executive order from the president, no one can challenge it. But of course, no one will agree with them, what they have started, what people have appreciated, what the taxpayers spend the money on it, and has been just withdrawn for no reason, and no any political reason, no security reason. Threat of Al-Shabaab is on the rise in the region, in Somalia, and I think the Somali government is not anywhere close to take over their own security. And if Americans withdraw now, you see what happens now in Galkayo, you see what happened in Mogadishu last few months.
The U.S. Africa Command says it's repositioning its troops to nearby bases in Kenya and Djibouti and will continue the fight against Al-Qaeda and ISIL. In the first half of January, a wave of new airstrikes in Somalia have killed more than a dozen militants and destroyed some of their strategic compounds. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, at least 32 dead and over 100 wounded in a suicide bomb attack in central Baghdad. And in Kenya's Rift Valley, local experts educate residents on staying safe from snakes. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. We start in Iraq, where at least 32 people have been killed and 110 injured in a twin suicide bomb attack in central Baghdad. The death toll is rising, with several of the wounded in critical condition. The Iraqi military says 2 attackers detonated their explosive vests in a market. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. And now in western India, at least 5 people are dead after a fire tore through a plant being built for the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, the Serum Institute of India. Officials said 4 people were rescued. Thick clouds of black smoke were seen billowing from a building at the site in the city of Pune. The institute makes millions of doses of vaccines developed by AstraZeneca and Oxford University. The company says the production of coronavirus vaccines is not affected. Government officials say the fire may have been caused by an electrical fault. Libyan delegates have agreed on a referendum for a draft constitution formed in 2017. The delegates representing rival administrations were meeting in Egypt. The constitutional talks aimed to lay the legal groundwork for Libya to hold elections at the end of this year. Here's Adel Al-Mahrawi with more.
A day after the United Nations announced an agreement between Libyans over the mechanism to appoint an interim executive authority, there was more good news. Representatives of Libya's eastern-based parliament and western-based High Council of State have agreed on the process to form a new constitution for the country.
There have been arguments about whether the elections should be held on the same legal basis which the ones in 2012 and 2014 were held. Or should there be new regulations? So the differences between the Libyan parliament and the High Council of State are in their views about the legalities and the procedures of the elections. That's why the agreement is very important.
A document from the meeting circulated showing 19 of the 30 delegates in Egypt's Hurghada city approving to move forward with a referendum on the 2017 draft constitution. The draft was formed by 60 Libyans equally representing the three regions of East, West and South. But in recent years, the committee has been severely criticized by the Eastern politicians. It is still not clear when the Libyan referendum will be held.
The interim government's main strategic mission is holding the general elections. Postponing the date is so far non-negotiable. That means technically everyone interested in Libya wants to reach the minimum agreement between Libyans to get that process going. That's why I think a referendum might not precede the elections. After the elected government is formed, it makes more sense for it to take on responsibilities of the new constitution, the new positions and all other challenges.
The constitutional track is part of the UN-led Libyan political talks. A third round of talks will be held in February to set the constitutional requirements needed for Libya to hold elections in December.
Libyans have been debating about their new constitution for nearly 6 years. The initial agreement reached in Hurghada promises to put a final end to this long legal dispute. It is also another indication that rival politicians are continuing to bridge the huge gap in the views between them. Adel Al-Mahrawi, CGTN, Cairo.
The International Organization for Migration says 48 migrants have been rescued off the coast of Libya. Among them are 11 children and a woman. The organization said in a tweet on Wednesday that staff were at the Tripoli port to provide emergency assistance. IOM has stressed that Libya is not a safe port for disembarkation. Even so, thousands attempt to cross the Mediterranean Sea each year trying to reach Europe. United Nations agencies have voiced deep concern over what they call a worsening humanitarian crisis in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province. Now that's where, according to the UN, attacks by armed groups have forced more than 565,000 people to flee their homes, who are now displaced. The UN agencies held a virtual press conference in Johannesburg. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
The province of Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique has been under ongoing violent attacks, allegedly by a terrorist group. According to the United Nations, the attacks have intensified substantially in recent weeks. The United Nations further asserts that the escalating crisis has now left many communities entirely dependent on humanitarian assistance, further describing the situation as desperate.
The situation in Cabo Delgado is dire. It is a humanitarian and protection crisis where human rights abuses on civilians occur every day. The international community cannot let this situation continue like that.
This assessment comes on the back of a recent visit to Cabo Delgado by the United Nations regional directors. The visit was to assess the plight and needs of displaced populations as well as of host communities in that province.
We saw a huge amount of displaced women, children and men in a very dire situation. We saw children, women and men sharing one house, 56 people. They had been hosted by a host community. The situation of food security and undernutrition has clearly deteriorated when we see the numbers.
The UN regional directors say more than $36 million is required to respond to this crisis.
We are at this very important moment during this crisis very committed to contribute to address the crisis. During our visit, we could witness that this crisis is really unfolding on three different fronts. This is together a humanitarian crisis, this is a security crisis, and this is also a development crisis, which requires urgent action and investment in all these three fronts concomitantly.
We also saw some truly humbling and inspiring demonstrations of solidarity, hospitality, generosity, and resilience. And I think that's what has given us really, I think we took away really a very strong sense that we need to be doing more, and this needs to be an issue that requires global attention.
The UN agencies also raised concerns over the continuing impact of the coronavirus pandemic in that area. Yulisa Njomela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Historically, due to its semi-arid conditions, snakes have thrived in Baringo County, deep in Kenya's Rift Valley region. The county government estimates that hundreds of people are bitten by snakes every month. Well, now local experts are teaching residents how to keep the snakes at bay and what to do if bitten. CGTN's Wakista Nyabwa now reports.
Residents of Kambi Samaki in Kenya's Rift Valley region start their days early. They are intent on completing their tasks before nightfall. When it gets dark, snakes crawl out from beneath the rocks where they hide until it is cool. In this village, everyone knows someone who has been bitten by a snake. Charles Kipyegon suffered a snake bite in 1996.
I was in my house, seated, and then I wanted to move a stool with my children. Then after doing this, moving that stool, and I was bitten, attacked by the snake.
Neighbors rushed him to hospital where doctors administered anti-venom treatment. He recovered, but still carries the scars.
My hand, sometimes when you want to touch, it is paralyzed.
The semi-arid environment of most parts of Baringo County makes this a favorable habitat for a number of snake species. The county government estimates that every month between 200 to 300 people suffer snake bites. A third die from the bites. Even when the victims survive, they are often disfigured.
The incidents of snake attacks mostly occur here during the night time. The snakes like to come into our houses.
At the local snake park, visitors can see indigenous snake species such as the rock python, the spitting cobra, puff adders and black mambas. The black mambas are among some of the most venomous snakes in the region. But the park does more than just satisfy visitors' curiosity. Officials often hold talks, advising community members on how to keep snakes away.
We advise people actually to clear the compound, to make sure that there's no hanging trees around, because particularly the tree climbers.
But residents have devised their own methods of coping. Charles believes the ants that mill around his home irritate the snakes.
Right now what we are telling our children is they have to, when they find rocks, possibly can be the home of, never put their fingers, never tamper. Some kind of flowers which produce a certain smell that snakes don't.
It isn't unusual to see water vessels such as this one on doorsteps in homesteads across Baringo County. A section of locals believe that this is one of the ways in which they can keep snakes out.
They have to ensure that also water throws are actually left outside the compound so that if they come out at night to take water, they don't come into the room.
Some methods, like the ants and water troughs, are yet to be proven scientifically. Others, like clearing bushes, have proved effective in keeping snakes at bay. The government has also moved to stock local hospitals with anti-venom and to train health workers. And whenever they spot a snake, locals have learned to call the Kenya Wildlife Service to remove it. However, the rough terrain still poses a challenge to patients rushing to hospitals. Each precaution therefore counts as humans and snakes try to find room to coexist in this semi-arid land that is home to them both. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
Business news now. Here's Penina Karibe with the latest.
Thank you, Lindy. Coming up on Africa Live Business. The African Development Bank to provide debt relief of more than $400 million to Sudan. And inflation in Zimbabwe drops to 349%. That's a lot better than over 700% some months earlier.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Sudan and the African Development Bank have agreed on a strategy to provide relief on more than $400 million in arrears owed by Sudan. The Sudanese Finance Ministry said the bank was financing development projects in the country worth more than $500 million. Sudan was released from U.S. sanctions last year, allowing it back to the world's financial markets. The country is reportedly looking at the United Kingdom, France and the U.S. for debt restructuring. Easing inflation in Zimbabwe is restoring consumer confidence and giving a boost to economic recovery measures. According to official figures, December inflation was 349%, capping months of steady decline from a high of 785% in May. From Harare, here's Faremo Kutuya with the details.
Efforts by the Treasury to rein in inflation that had spiraled to a 10-year peak paid off in the latter part of 2020 as the rate of price increases retreated in successive months. Though it did not reach the targeted 300% by year end, it was still a boon for hard-hit shoppers.
That decline in inflation also tends to affect disposable incomes. So what they could buy in the beginning of 2020, in the second quarter and in the third quarter, obviously there is a huge difference because prices would have more or less stayed at the same level.
The gains were achieved by containing money supply growth.
The major driver of inflation in Zimbabwe in the past 3 years has largely been unabated money supply, which was beyond economic growth. Last year alone, money supply grew by over 103%, so that does push inflation. So now, most producers and retailers have been allowed to transact in foreign currency. So what it does is that it reduces demand for foreign currency on the parallel market, which was actually very key in pushing prices up.
However, the restoration of multi-currency regime had some unintended consequences, such as multi-tiered pricing. Shoppers here say because of the market distortions, the value of the local unit continues to be eroded, and that has diminished their buying power.
There has been an improvement for those who earn US dollars. But if you get paid in local currency, it's still difficult to make ends meet.
We hear that the local currency has gained against the US dollar, but it's all in theory. The reality is when you try and go and shop, you don't buy much because things are still going up.
Authorities will argue that the numbers show the increases are at a much slower pace than before, a trend they hope to maintain in 2021, where average annual inflation is projected at below 135%. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Moving west to Nigeria, where restaurants are struggling as inflation compounds the pandemic impact. Melanie Ibe's restaurant hosted about 50 people a day when it opened in Lagos a year ago. While fear of the coronavirus has driven most diners away, Ibe believes inflation has made the situation worse.
Since Café de Lyon opened in January 2020, the price of basic ingredients has risen sharply, just weeks before Nigeria's first-known coronavirus case was diagnosed in Lagos. Food inflation has risen for 16 straight months, and as of December 2020, it stood at 19.56%.
This has really crippled us in the last 1 year, and then the prices of food have just skyrocketed. The quality of food that would normally plate for our customers, we've had to reduce this.
White onions, an ingredient used in many of Melanie's dishes, costs around $2.62 each, a $2 hike more than she would pay when she opened her eatery. Melanie has resisted increasing the price of dishes to retain customers.
Customers don't come out anymore. We will not be in business anymore. There will be no reason for the restaurant to be opened, and obviously we're looking at a timeline of around May, June, or during the summer at the most. That's it, we would have to shut down.
In addition, the ordered border closures that began in August 2019 to combat smuggling that continued until December 2020 to prevent the spread of the coronavirus further punctured the sector's stakeholders.
Most of our produce are not really made locally, and then the ones that are made locally, which is at the middle belt, there were lots of killings and fightings there, so price really spiked.
Nigeria is in its second recession in 4 years, triggered by an oil price crash that hammered state revenues and weakened the naira. This has made imports more expensive, spurring on inflation. And with the global impact of the pandemic added on, many restaurants may soon be on the chopping block. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
In South Africa, the liquor industry is hoping to get another tax deferment from the government. Industry bodies have submitted an application arguing that they have suffered massive revenue shortfalls and job losses. The request comes after President Cyril Ramaphosa banned all alcohol trade for a third time. Meanwhile, brewing giant SAB is challenging the ban in a submission to the country's constitutional court. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
It's estimated the South African Revenue Service will have lost a third of its estimated tax collections by the 2020 financial year end next month. Last year, government granted the liquor industry tax deferments worth $33 million because of the ban. The liquor industry needs more relief.
Our biggest tax bill every month and every year is specifically with regards to excise tax. Excise tax in South Africa it's charged on the production of the goods, not on the sale of the goods.
It's going to be difficult for them to pay the duty because the money that they get from the sales is the one that they're going to use to pay, and especially because duty is paid at source. So they pay the duty before they sell the goods. So when the alcohol products, gets out of their warehouse, they must pay the duty already.
The liquor industry pays around $150 million in taxes each month. Because alcohol producers pay tax at source, they already owe the Revenue Service large amounts on excise duties despite the halt in trade.
So the reality is we are currently owe the South African Revenue Service excise tax for goods that were produced in December and November, which we haven't been able to sell because of the ban on the sale of alcohol. So we have approached SARS and Treasury to ask for a delay in the payment of those excise taxes. And we think it's only fair that we pay those excise taxes when we're allowed to sell the products that we've actually manufactured.
Whichever way you get taxed in South Africa, whether it's duty at source or at the point of sale, the tax gets funded out of cash flow. And right now there's no cash flow. And we've asked government to defer our payment. It's important to note it's a deferment. We're not asking that we not pay our tax, but that we pay it 90 days later.
SARS revenues are expected to be $20 billion less this year because of the impacts of COVID-19. Tax collections were already taking strain due to weak economic growth. The fiscus is under more pressure than ever before, especially with the Treasury trying to find money for vaccines.
Despite the heavy losses for both government and industry, it was decided that a third liquor ban was necessary in order to help alleviate the pressure on the healthcare system. There's still no confirmation as to when the ban will be lifted. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Tanzania's government plans to auction 30 hunting blocks next month after postponing the exercise for almost a year. The Tanzania Wildlife Management Authority has invited applications through e-auctioning. In June 2019, the government placed 26 hunting blocks on an online auctioning platform to mark the beginning of a major transition towards game hunting for sport. CGTN's Daniel Kijo reports.
Tanzania might be the king of the jungle in Africa's trophy hunting sector. Since the official start of trophy hunting in 1891 under German rule, the country has generated millions of dollars globally. It has 23 game reserves and 126 hunting blocks. Each block ranges from 200 to 3,000 square kilometers. Now, using an electronic auctioning system, it is inviting local and international hunting companies to bid for 30 vacant hunting blocks, a system the Tanzanian wildlife officials say is free from corruption and is transparent.
So we think instead of administrative allocating this hunting block, where maybe somebody will be biased to decide who to get what, we have decided automatic electronic auction will be very fair and very transparent.
Last year, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism had postponed electronic auctioning of the vacant hunting blocks due to complaints from some stakeholders, as well as market instability caused by the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. With less than a month before the auction, the Tanzanian Tourism Board says the auction can grow new markets.
Right now we're trying to focus in promoting hunting tourism to other Far East and Russia markets, and well, it's paying off right now. When a hunter comes to Tanzania, they bring in between $20,000 to $30,000 US, compared to a normal tourist who comes on leisure who can bring in between $2,000 to $3,000. So you can see the dynamics that it's a market that we need to tap on.
The government has maintained that trophy hunting is one of the sustainable ways of managing wildlife, as it provides much needed funding for conservation efforts. It also says it operates in compliance with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the world's leading authority on the status of the natural world and measures needed to safeguard it.
Other species which are under IUCN category are not listed as endangered species are allowed to be hunted. So apart from abiding to the international regulation of conservation status of this wildlife species, the animals which can be utilized and are agreed in internationally, all these animals are hunted.
The U.S. is Tanzania's biggest market for big game hunting. According to Tower, Tanzania alone accounts to nearly 60% of all U.S. imports of hunting trophies from Africa. The U.S. government lifted the ban on the importation of lion and elephant hunting trophies from Tanzania under case-by-case consideration in 2019. This has prompted fresh interest in trophy hunting as a subsector of tourism. As it stands, the government says it allows hunting of 18 to 24% of all animals in the annual hunting quota. They now want to use this e-auctioning system to increase the utilization of these wildlife resources so as to increase revenue while still protecting the species for generations to come. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
And I'll leave it there for now. But later on Global Business, US President Joe Biden has a lot in his entry. We'll look at what his plan could be for Africa. That's at the top of the hour. I shall see you then. For now, I hand you back to Lindy.
Thanks, Penina. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Coming up, changing Tanzania's legal language. The courts translate all legal documents into Swahili.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Courts in Tanzania will from February translate all court decisions into Swahili. Now, Swahili is the country's national language, but only one of two commonly spoken languages. Instead, English has been the predominant language of law, with court records and proceedings in English since the colonial era. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
Swahili is restricted to lower courts in Tanzania, but the proceedings and judgments of the courts are recorded and prepared in English.
At the
primary court level, all proceedings are done in Swahili, and it's these primary courts that deal with 70% of all legal issues. So Kiswahili is already used in 70% of cases. So it's in the district, resident magistrate, high, and the Court of Appeal courts that English is used.
The government says the policy that would guide the process is now in the final stages. The goal is to ensure all people are empowered to understand the laws of the land. The debate over the role language plays in the delivery of justice and adoption of Kiswahili as the language of law in Tanzania has been raging on for years. The question has been, which language should Tanzanian courts use in the proceedings and in writing of judgments in a country where a majority of court users are comfortable with Kiswahili?
When speaking in a native language, a person can defend themselves well, to argue clearly and say, no, I'm not guilty because of this or that.
Most people don't know English well, so understanding issues becomes hard, but if done in Kiswahili, everyone in the country will understand the legal issues clearly.
However, the Chief Justice warns that care should be taken when implementing the directive because English is a language used in legal training.
We agreed that the first step is for the government to translate all important laws. Once the laws have been translated, it becomes easier for courts to agree on the meanings of the translated words. For instance, the translation of the legal word mens reis could be translated differently from court to court.
Changing Tanzania's legal language means translating laws that have been enacted years ago. People in the legal fraternity believe that if done well, it could create a new chapter in legal history where justice is more accessible for millions of Tanzanians. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Tens of thousands of people have been attending the annual Epiphany Festival in Ethiopia. Known as Timket, the Ethiopian Epiphany symbolizes togetherness and the cleaning of one's sins through mass baptism. It is also a time for extraordinary religious festivities. In 2019, UNESCO added the Ethiopian Epiphany to its list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity. The three-day event was held despite COVID-19 restrictions in the country.
Epiphany is being celebrated especially this year. This is due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. When we celebrate this holiday, our hearts also go out to those who lost their lives due to this disease. So we are here trying to be cautious, but at the same time celebrate this blessed day. We need God for us to defeat this disease.
This year's holiday is celebrated with a lot of color and pomp. We have the youth who have joined hands here with the authorities to make sure it's peacefully celebrated, and so far we are delighted to see the togetherness and the unity as well as love from our people. I'd like to wish all Orthodox Christians a happy Epiphany.